are listening to KFAI 90.3 FM Minneapolis and 106.7 FM St. Paul, radio without boundaries. Online at kfai.org. Up next, Contemporary Emily's, hosted by Jen March and friends.
I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody, too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell, they'd banish us, you know. How dreary to be somebody, how public, like a frog, to tell your name the livelong day to an admiring bog. Hi, thanks for tuning in to our KFAI International Women's Day show, Contemporary Emily's. I'm your host, Jen March, and you just heard me read one of Emily Dickinson's most well-known poems. Emily Dickinson is one of the most well-known women poets. In fact, many people credit her with being one of the founders of the American poetic voice. Dickinson was born in Amherst, Massachusetts in 1830, and she lived a quiet, unique life. She kept herself isolated in her house much of the time. She received few visitors, but the people who were in her life seemed to have a great impact on her and her poetry. Dickinson's poems were not published during her lifetime, but in 1886, her family discovered nearly 1,800 of her poems, and 4 years after her death, her work was first published. As a woman poet in the 21st century in America, I am curious about Emily Dickinson. How did she feel closed up in her room, writing poem after poem? Could she ever have imagined how important a role she would play in American poetry, and for the generations of poets, women, and men who would follow her? What is her legacy? As women poets, as American poets, if we don't acknowledge Emily Dickinson, are we still tied to her? I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. The eyes around had wrung them dry, and breaths were gathering firm. For that last onset, when the king be witnessed in the room, I willed my keepsakes, signed away what portions of me be assignable. And then it was, there interposed a fly, with blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz, between the light and me, and then the windows failed, and then I could not see to see. Thank you for tuning in to our International Women's Day show, Contemporary Emily's. During the show, you will hear the voices of 16 women poets who live in the Twin Cities. These poets will read their poems, one after the other. Imagine poems playing like songs. I invite you to get lost in the images and emotions of these poems. Let them carry you back in time as you consider the history and future of American poetry. The first poet we'll hear from is Sarah Fox.
Satchidananda. How do they appear, I ask, but no one can say. A droplet of liquid animates and gels itself and begins to eat and wander and fear. On my kitchen ceiling, the tiny, translucent worms that will become brown moths sailing the house air, small and tentative as a sparrow's eyelids. Compost worms and apple worms and sandbox worms that proliferate out of the orifices of children. I was colonized by a second soul who came up out of the rot to sedate me, parse and niche in me, grow a skin over the top of my skin. Now a lurch worm, its thimble bowl of a mouth brimmed with blood, my terrorist friend, priest crafting before the feast chore, wonders which one is the whole, the sky or the moon. A woman waits for me. The membrane may be papery as a wasp's nest, but bears the same impulse. To get beyond means first getting through. What tentacled or stinging aliveness awaits the vulnerable width of my wrists? To sting or cuff, bolt me liminally between landings? It gets harder to breathe in here with so many crowding round the little stamen pulse, thread of the warp. It's like a hive in here, warped possession conjugal, stinger and punch. What was cave-like? A womb? That was the first illusion. The god of sleep, with his wings and his entourage and his drugs, crept in with a blueprint. I gnaw, purring at his salty hide. I slid out of my mother's body. Of being numinous, of drift and syringe, of metal atonement, of a tube-fed melancholy, of post-terror karmic, of a certain amount of ear, of the smog smear around the blood hollow, of the ossified berry like a cave cataract, of my mind branched out through the fontanelle, antlering, leaves letting go of me.
This is Lynette Rainey Grandel, and this poem is called The Naturalist. This small horse is a savvy naturalist, a modern Linnaeus, identifying then eschewing violets, anemones, preferring timothy and first-growth clover. It takes a 4-footed expert to draw attention to apple trees blossoming in the forest of a forgotten farmstead, where small spring leaves do not hide the brighter blooms. The naturalist moves past them now. He will sense the apples later, when they have become round, ripe, and useful. Last week the clover was not good enough. Only the succulent ligules of meadow grass tasted right. This week the palate expands, dandelions gain a cunning astringency, clover, pre-bloom, hints of sugar. Timothy's green honey flows through its fattening stem. It's so clear how to live when the head bows to the grass, when one follows the contours of the curving world, nuzzling all manner of insects in the soil amid last year's yellowed wisps. He lifts his head occasionally to see something in the distance, a moving shadow, the source of a strange new scent. Mostly, he examines the earth. It's where he lives.
I'm Jackie Fuller, and this is called Your Silence. Your silence is the moon on a 10 below morning, a pearl held in fingers of steam. It's the 21 bus mushing up Marshall stuffed with drunks. An empty skyway at 5, Christmas Eve. And there's me, Minnesota New, crossing its bland expanse, my heart trailing a mitten on a string. Don't do this to me.
I'm Haley Lachey, and this is As for the Exiles. You were born in the sign of reassurance. Your open mouth is filled with time. It closes around the stain of my lips, which is shaped like a baby world. It is smaller than the earth. It is 2 time zones like you and me. We are separate now, and holding our hands away from our bodies, pushing each other away, the salt from each other's hands painted on our palms, a grid for new sweat to break through. The journeys we both take are not over water. They are through condensation, and the memory of your skin evaporates against no more words than. I'm Julie Larson. Every morning, I tell blue spruce outside my window she is so very real and perfect, despite needles dropping into snow on one side. I tell her it is not despair that makes me look her way with longing. Depletion, I say. Momentary absence. In the gap, I fill myself with her thoughts, her billowing asymmetry.
Hi, this is Didi Popa, and I'm reading Blue Shine Holiday. This is holy grounds. Whatever thoughts you have, becomes her. Moon-struck blueness bends over the street we mean. Our desire hovers like the dew, lays down in hours in heavy ash. In lantern blue light, I remember the day. The sun filtered all day through leaves. His stained glass rays gems on skin and ground, so like the sun that follows her face everywhere. Now she's gone. How she used to stoop between the friar's hybrid teas, the rose bushes encircling a crown of thorns, her hands roughed soil and sweat, a red petal stuck between fingers like a drop of blood. How the sun on those days would recede ever so slow, its votive light stretching, casting redness like vastness, retreating shadows into walls of stone. Then her voice calling me in the darkness, in this indigo light. Ndi, ndi. A flitter of dropped petals, the shudder of leaves, the screech of an owl calling me home.
Thanks again for tuning in to KFAI's International Women's Day programming. We just heard Blue Shine Holiday by Dee Dee Coca, Every Morning by Jean Larson, As for the Exiles by Haley Lachey, Your Silence by Jackie Fuller, The Naturalist by Lynette Rennie Grandel, and we started off the set with selections